This should be a really, really positive presentation, which at the end of this, you should feel much better about yourself. Okay? And the title of this is Train Your Mind and Change Your Brain. Subtitle, Neuroplasticity, a word we don't use that often, but one which you will become familiar with. So, the question is, can you change? And what do you think about yourself and about other people? You know, there's all these cliches that have been around forever. Old dogs can't learn new tricks. He's set in his ways or her ways. Fried my brain on drugs, so it can't change. So this is an important question. Can you change? And do you believe you can change? And we know that what you believe has a great influence on what you actually can do. You know, it's really interesting how they train elephants. You know, you go to a carnival or something, and you see this big elephant, you know, weighs many tons, and there's a little stake in the ground or a pylon of some kind and a chain, and the elephant is attached to this chain. The elephant could pick up that and 2 or 3 cars and walk down the road with them, but he doesn't. Why? Because when the elephant is little, they attach the pylon and the chain, and the elephant at that point, being pretty frisky, tries to move it and can't move it, and after a while it accepts, when I'm chained to this pylon, I can't move it, and they stop trying. Okay? Well, I think a lot of people are kind of like that. They have been told, no, you can't change. They've accepted the conventional wisdom, you know, whatever it is, and they believe it, and they don't change. So what are some brain facts? Neuroplasticity. Well, neurons are in your brain. Plasticity means things that can move and change, you know. So the brains of young children are very plastic. They're very changeable. We kind of know that if you've been around young kids. A 1-year-old has twice the number of neuronal connections as its mother. It's amazing. We think like, oh, you know, as we're adults, got bigger heads, we should have more of that stuff, right? But it's actually the opposite. One estimate is we lose 20 billion synapses a day from childhood to early adolescence. Well, that sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? It's like having your bank account cleaned out, you know? But there's a reason for it. So here's another word you have never heard of before, probably. Hemispherectomy. What is it? Well, we know that there's 2 hemispheres in our brain, and surgery that can remove an entire hemisphere in children who suffer from uncontrollable seizures. So it's not done, this is not an operation that's done under normal circumstances. I mean, this is pretty severe. But it may be the only way for kids who are just completely, can't control the seizures any other way. If the left hemisphere is removed before the child is 4 years old, the child still learns to talk, to read, to write, even though the left hemisphere is the seat of language. After 6 or 7 years, the same operation leaves a severe language deficit. Okay, you're saying, why? Well, just a few years ago, the conventional wisdom, and this was the conventional wisdom among scientists, and I'll quote, in the adult, nerve paths are something fixed and immutable. Okay, so the paths that have been developed in your brain just stayed that way. In other words, after childhood, the brain is sort of hardwired. Well, you've heard that term before, and cannot be changed. and no new neurons are being born, so gradually the brain, as the neurons die, deteriorates. That was the conventional wisdom. But wait a minute. That is no longer the conventional wisdom. In 1999, so not that long ago, neurologists in the journal Science, peer-reviewed, very, very famous journal, we are still taught that the fully mature brain lacks the mechanism needed to replenish neurons and to reestablish neuronal networks after acute injury or due to the loss of neurons seen in neurodegenerative diseases. And you're going to see a picture here of the brain, 100 billion neurons in our brain and 100 trillion connections. Amazing. You wake up in the morning and think, man, what a piece of equipment I've got up there, okay? So what we knew was kind of a dismal picture. Rehabilitation for adults after brain damage from a stroke was a waste of time. Because again, those connections were kind of hardwired and there was nothing new happening in the brain. Trying to alter pathological brain wiring underlying some psychiatric diseases like OCD or depression could not possibly work for the same reason. But in the past few years, the conventional wisdom, no pun intended, has been turned on its head. Scientists all over the world have conducted a lot of experiments which show clearly that actions and thoughts can change the brain throughout our lifetime. Actions and thoughts. Interesting, huh? So you're seeing a picture called Synaptic Plasticity. Again, another term that you probably won't use much, but it's useful. So you have the neurons, and then you have this little synapse between them, and the chemical or electrical charge passes from one synapse, from one neuron to the other along the nerve cell, and that's how we think. That's how everything gets communicated up there. So monkeys have turned out to be very handy in science. I don't know, it's been so good for them, but it's been very good for science. So scientists, here's an incredible experiment. Scientists severed a nerve in several monkeys' hands. They then mapped the brains of those monkeys and found that other parts of the hand were now sending signals that were being processed in the same area that previously handled signals from the nerve that was severed. Okay? Okay. Well, that doesn't sound like hard wiring. That sounds like some rearranging. The brain is just kind of like, okay, I'm not getting a signal from there anymore. Let's just move things around a little bit. Okay? Well, that's only the start of this. In another experiment, the motor cortex of 4 monkeys were carefully mapped so they can tell what's going on and what's lighting up and so forth. Then they were given a new complex task that they had never done before, but it's pretty complicated. When they remapped the motor cortex, it showed a significant expansion in the area controlling those specific movements. So, hey, things are happening, things are changing, hence neuroplasticity, okay? The brain is kind of making arrangements. Okay, in another experiment, monkeys were deaffernated. The nerves of their arms were severed. Years later, scientists discovered that brushing one of the monkeys' face lit up the hand and arm zone. Okay? So the brain wants signals, wants input, so it just kind of moved things around. Having no signals from one region, the brain just rewired itself. You're saying, what does this have to do to me? Hang on, we're going to get there. Okay. This is even more remarkable. Experiments with the blind demonstrated that the visual cortex lit up when blind participants touched something. So the visual part of the brain, 35% of the brain is the visual part of your brain. It's a great big section of your brain. But when it was deprived, it was getting no input. You have this big visual thing. It's getting no input from the eyes because the person's blind. It just rewired itself to take signals from the hands and the fingers, which then became extraordinarily sensitive. Okay? Amazing, isn't it? I think it's absolutely amazing. So the results of a stroke often leave one side of the body paralyzed and immobile. That's kind of the standard thing for a stroke. So a scientist immobilized the good functional arm of a stroke victim. So you have one arm that's kind of, not operating. The other one's good. Tied that one down, okay? Then there were, for 10 days, 10 hours a day, a training program to use the bad arm. At the end of the training, victims could unscrew the cap from a bottle, raise it, and drink from it. The brain rewired itself, okay? Because you were demanding it do something, and eventually it said, okay, if you keep doing this over and over again, I'll cooperate, okay? New neurons also, they discovered, are being produced in the brain, okay? So there's the idea that the brain's dying, you start off with all this stuff and it just continues to dissipate. Not the case. If you're using, first of all, you got to use the brain, okay? Okay. But if you do exercise your brain, it will continue to generate new growth, okay? So that's also good news. So old dogs can learn new tricks. Actually, new tricks will probably help the dog create enough more brain cells to learn new tricks. So what are the conditions for growth? This is pretty important for all of us as human beings. What are the conditions for growth? So exercising voluntarily increases the number of neural stem cells that divide and become new neurons. So this is really use it or lose it. We've all heard that before. It's true with your brain. Use it and it will continue to generate new growth. 50% of the new cells that are created die. Well, that's okay. You still have 50% in bad. But living in an enriched environment, one where the brain is constantly being challenged, helps these cells survive and become new neural cells. Okay? Can we change the effects of age? This is a particularly important question for me. Okay. Yeah, we can. Because we can continue to generate new cells as long as we exercise our brain. So if we don't just sit around and do nothing and watch, some corny TV show over and over again, well, exercise it and use it. In obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, the person knows, for example, their hands are not dirty, but feels compelled to wash them anyhow over and over again. Actually, it'd be very handy right now, but in ordinary circumstances, not in the middle of a pandemic, can be, you have the person who gets to their office, sits down, and then says, I know I left the stove on. Even though they kind of know they didn't leave the stove on, they've got to go back and check it. Then they come back to the office, and they're not sure whether they left it on when they went back to check it. So their entire lives are caught up in these little, compulsive, repetitive behaviors. They don't get a lot done. Using mindfulness meditation, learning to observe sensations and thoughts with calm clarity and without reacting, thinking of the sensation as not me, but as a malfunction of the brain, a faulty circle. So in other words, they're taught, these people who are having OCD, to meditate, which calms you down, okay? to really think about the sensations that they're having, this compulsion to go back and see whether the burner is still on, to just be calm about it, to recognize the sensations, identify them, not judge them as good or bad, just I'm feeling this now. And then thinking of the sensations as, well, that's that brain problem I've got, rather than I'm a failure, okay? What happened? Brain scans showed that activity in the orbital front cortex had fallen dramatically, okay? And that's this core of the OCD circuit. So by thinking, and this is the thing amazing, by thinking we change the brain. We always think is like, well, the brain changes us, but we can actually get in the driver's seat of this thing to a certain extent. So the results of thinking about the sensations in a different way actually altered the physical brain. If that isn't startling, okay, depression. And we've got a slide here. It says, it's a quote from somebody severe. The pain grew and grew, and I began to experience suicidal thoughts. I realized that life for me was at a desperate impasse. I thought of the garage as a place where I might sit in the car and inhale carbon monoxide. I'd look at the rafters in the attic and think of them as places where I might hang myself. I looked at sharp objects as being implements for my wrist. Depression, not nice. Okay, Prozac. In 1987, Prozac hits the market. Soon it sells $2 billion worth of product a year. Hailed as a wonder drug. Part of the movement away from psychotherapy, quote, talk therapy, and into drug therapy, psychopharmacology. Helen Mayberg discovered in 2002 that antidepressant pills and inert pills, placebos, this is the sugar pill, have exactly the same effect on the brains of depressed people. If they thought they were getting effective therapy, then their brain activity changed. Okay? Neuroplasticity. 50% of all patients relapse into depression. 50%. They suffer an average of 4 major episodes of depression, each lasting an average of 5 months. About 2 years. I mean, at first they have the depression, they've got to get out of that. Then there's the 4 relapses, another 2 years. So, 145 depressed patients divided into 2 groups, mindfulness training and drug therapy. 8 weeks of therapy for each group. 1 year later, the mindfulness group was 66% relapse-free. The drug therapy group was 34% relapse-free. Okay? Because pills don't change your mind. They don't change your brain. But mindfulness does. Look, for 2,500 years, Buddhist monks have been practicing meditation, believing that by focusing on the mind, they could change their consciousness. We know that the mind cannot exist without the brain. Okay? We've never run into a mind where there wasn't a brain in the vicinity. In fact, the brain causes the mind. It provides the physical hardware so there can be a mind. So we kind of know that's one causation. The brain causes the mind. But up until very recently, we didn't understand in downward causation that the mind could actually act on the brain. So we have the brain causes the mind, and the mind can change the brain. Pretty remarkable. Picture of meditation. We're not exactly sure how the mind changes the brain, but it's clear that it involves paying attention. there's another experiment. I have to share this one. The brains. This is before. Everybody now, all taxi drivers seem to have a device, mapping device, electronic mapping device, GPS device, that they're using to go through the streets. I was recently in London, where there was still a cabbie who did not have one. I mean, he really knew the streets. He knew every single street. But back 20 years ago, a cab driver in New York or in London or one of these big cities, they knew every damn street in a very large city. I mean, when they mapped their brains, what they discovered is that part of the brain was enormous. The neural connections there were much larger than any other group of people that they studied. Because they used it. So the brain said, okay, if you're using it every day and it's important to you and you're really paying attention, we're going to respond and just rewire and just give it a lot more mechanical ability to solve your particular problem, which is where am I going? We tend to think that a person's happiness or unhappiness set point is pretty persistent. In other words, things that, somebody is poor, struggling, all of a sudden they come into a lot of money, they've got a nice house. Does their happiness change much? It turns out not really. It's kind of persistent. And people who are very happy, even when their circumstances get worse, kind of tend to remain about as happy as they were. But the effects of meditation can actually change the set point, which is pretty remarkable. So, what are the implications of all this? You may have heard somewhere, thinking makes it so. Who knew? Who knew that thinking really can alter who you are, how you react to others, to the world, and to your own life by training your mind? Now, I told you, you're going to feel good about this presentation because all that crap that you heard, that you can't change, that you're kind of stuck where you are, well, throw that out the window. You can change at any age. Being old is not, this is particularly good for me, being older does not prevent you from continuing to be able to change and alter your brain and do different things, change your attitude, change your skill level, change almost anything you want to focus on and really meditate on and pay attention to and work on. Your brain will say, okay, I got this. I'm going to help you with this that you seem to be intent on doing, and will begin to actually make physiological changes in your hardware to help you accomplish your purpose. Wow. So I think a lot of people have been told throughout their lives, well, the way you were raised, or you're just like your father, or, some statement that made you feel, particularly because it was repeated over and over again, and maybe you had a string of failures, so it kind of reinforced the messages you were getting that, well, I really can't change. I'm just kind of stuck being kind of who I am. I'm a failure or whatever. It isn't true. It isn't true. And you don't need any equipment. You're carrying the equipment around. It weighs about 40 pounds. It's on the top of your shoulders. Use it.